Okie dokie. Second video. Somebody asked if I could do a second video, and two, could I do it on mutton bird or titty? And I can, and I will, and this is that. But I'm going to approach it in a roundabout weird way as to what I think the significance of titty is and what it represents as an aspect of food culture. There's plenty of recipes available online if you want it. If you don't live in Aotearoa and you want to taste what titty tastes like, get yourself a duck, soak it in fish sauce. You're going to need about 3 litres of, we'll call it 4 litres, a gallon of fish sauce, and soak your titty in that. If you have a cryovac, food saver, something like that, you could probably get away with 500 mils. Soak the duck in that for a good 3 or 4 days, and that will be an approximation of what titty tastes like. It is a very pungent, rich, fishy flavoured, gamey animal, and that's why I think it's so important, because of what it represents. I mentioned this previous video, conf is a method of preservation, and if you boil a titty, it will release so much fat that it will actually set on a layer above the pot and help preserve it. Also, if you boil it whole and you reduce it down, like if you boil it till it starts to collapse when it's really unctuous and beautiful, it will actually form a jelly that will help set, that you can also eat and is tasty in and of itself. Mix it with some kumara, have the time of your life. It's fantastic. But that's not what I think the most important aspect of titty is culturally. Now, it's on an island and there's only one iwi that's allowed to harvest it, and my te reo is not good enough to even attempt to pronounce it, so I'm not going to. I'm going to say that there are Takanga reasons why, traditional reasons why only one group get to harvest it, and I've got no problem with that. I think it's fantastic. Everybody should have their own specialty. But here's where it gets interesting. Because the primary way of cooking it, the easiest method, if you will, of boiling it in a gourd with hot rocks, preserves it. It's a trade food, or it can be a trade food, provided the weather isn't too hot, which in most of the southern parts of Aotearoa aren't going to be too hot for room temperature animal fat to melt. This becomes a trade good. You can trade it. You can start to use it to give to people as kohi, as a gift. You can give this. You can keep it, as I mentioned earlier. If you can preserve it, you don't have to hunt it all the time. You can go out once a year, once a moon, once a decade, for example, and you can harvest enough. Not so much that you damage the species. I had it drilled into me by my dad that we only at most get to take 1/3. 1/3 must exist for the thing that you are harvesting. 1/3 gets to exist for everything else. So sharks, fish, everything that eats a titty, they're allowed to have 1/3, and we get to have 1/3 to ourselves. That's the extreme case. You don't take 1/3 because the 1/3 is for everybody, every person that exists. So you don't walk up to a tree and take the full 1/3 because that's greedy. But you remember, if you are the custodians, the relative, the caretaker of these things, you remember that you at most only get to take 1/3. And I think that's a pretty good, interesting idea, and I think if we had that idea, there'd be a lot less problems in the world. That's neither here nor there. But that's just my take on it. We only get 1/3. But regardless of the specific numbers of your harvest cap, having something like titty that can be preserved, as long as it's kept cold, gives you a commodity that can be traded, which once again is important because the Austronesian cultural block stretching from Taiwan to Chile to Madagascar to the bottom of Aotearoa, including Melanesia, Micronesia, the natives of the Japanese islands and Polynesians. It's a trading empire. We traded. We didn't cross the Pacific Ocean because we needed to go on holiday somewhere. we maintained contact with each other because we traded. We crossed the distances to trade, and that means we need commodities. And foods like TiiTii and the method of preparing TiiTii that ends up with, I'm just going to call it comfy because I don't, the missionaries that wrote down the first contact notes of this didn't know the traditional name, or if they did, they didn't understand what they were saying because they weren't chefs. And they did a massive, this is why religion is evil. Missionaries know one thing, the specific name of their God. That's all they know. That's not much. It's that much of human experience that is this much. And so when they make first contact and they attempt to bring civilization, there is so much that they don't know that it does not occur to them to write down. My French, Italian and German is absolutely pathetic, but I have learnt more from my bad translations of things than I have learned from the accepted English translations done by people that have masters and PhDs in languages. Because I am a chef, if I'm reading a cookbook, I already know what the person is trying to say. I just need to know how they say it. And that, I think, is a fundamental limitation of looking at historical records of things like missionaries, traders, naval officers. When you look at their contact assertions about a culture, they don't know what they're talking about. They know an awful lot about Jesus, buy, sell, low, high, and how to wage war on a log that's bobbing along in an ocean. When they talk about that, they're right. But when they start talking beyond that, well, a cobbler should stick to his last. And I think that is one thing that is forgotten by a lot of people. A lot of praise is heaped on early contact because it seems this person's done something incredibly brave, but what they've actually done is destroy a massive amount of knowledge for no other reason than their own personal egotism. We will never know just how much science and knowledge was destroyed by Europeans coming into the Pacific. There are scraps of a northern Pacific set of islanders that had a counting system for binary. They had the normal 1 to 10, but they also had a specific method for counting in binary. By the time someone knew enough about binary for that to be significant and want to write it down, everyone who knew how to do it, who grew up with it, who was indigenous to counting in binary, was dead. The missionaries didn't bother writing it down because they didn't understand what they were doing. Just think about that. The most powerful calculation tool that we have in existence was being used by people in the Northern Pacific, and we don't know why, because somebody brought Jesus on a boat. Anyway, that's not really where I'm wanting to go with this, but this is going to be a vicious defense of the cultural sovereignty of people. Not just Maori, not just my people, all people. And this is probably going to upset a lot of people because I'm not going to hold back, because I kind of don't want to, because it's cooking. This is my gutter. You're stepping into my gutter and want to bring the fire, so cool. Anyway, back to a trade empire. We don't know if there was a specific name or method for the preservation of it, but comfy, according to in the French method, and the missionaries compare traditional Maori practice in a gourd, apart from the rocks, being exactly the same as potted rabbit, the finest potted rabbit or potted duck, that which is confit to the English, the finest stuff they could get in Europe. And that was a trade good. If you know what you're doing with your confit, with your preservation technique, you can take that from Herefordshire and you can sell it in Dresden. I'm not saying that TiiTii was traded all across the the Pacific, but I guarantee it would have been driving. Would have been a driving force for in-island trade. And that brings me to an interesting point where a lot of people don't like the taste of TiiTii, and that's alarm bells. There was a group of, once again, the Northern Pacific, this time in the Russian sphere of influence. I can't remember if they're actually Inuk, or if they are a different but related, but Northern Pacific peoples. And they used to eat a lot. They had dishes very similar to Luke fish and rotted shark, which is dig a hole, throw your food in there, and leave it to naturally break down. In the Soviet period, I believe in the 1930s, these people were packed up, forced off their land because, well, hey, islanders don't get to live on islanders when Europeans need to kill each other in our backyard. Don't know why they can't do it in their own backyard. I hear Moscow's a lovely place. Why can't the Russians just kill everyone they need to kill in Moscow? Anybody that wants to kill the Russians can go to Moscow and kill them there. I don't know why they have to come into the Pacific to do it, but I guess everybody wants to have themselves a little tropical holiday. So they were taken in the 1930s, they returned in the 1960s. When they were removed from their situation, they lost access to traditional foods. It was genocide. They lost it. They lost connection to it. And there was a whole generation born that had never grown up eating this type of food, fermented in the ground. And it was done for preservation reasons. You have permafrost. I say rotted. It's not really rotted. It's a fermentation process, like luke fish, like rotted shark. It's fermented. It is fermented at low temperatures. It is completely safe to eat as long as you know what you're doing. Not everyone does. But it has a very strong ammonia taste to it. So 30 years, my whole generation, these people weren't exposed to this food. When they went back and they attempted to go through a cultural resurgence and come back, they couldn't stomach it. They couldn't stand the smell. They couldn't stand the taste. The stuff they do now is vastly different to the historical methods that were used. And the reason is because you need to be born into a culture to understand the food. And this, we can actually thank the Europeans for proving. There was a French study done on newborn infants' taste preferences using strongly flavoured things. They used anise. I know of it as the anise study from TAFE, and it's in one of the books behind me that I should probably pull out and be more prepared to doing this, but I would like to point out that I have a whole page of notes this time, so we'll consider this a dramatic increase of preparedness compared to the other one. So what they did was from the first trimester, the third month of pregnancy, they had women eat licorice, anise, a strongly scented candy. And they were encouraged to eat this whenever they felt snackish, whatever, have it. Just have anise. And they had a control group of women that didn't snack on licorice because they are sane and good people. And they didn't eat anise, which I salute. Anise is bad. Anyway, so we flash forward to these women all give birth. Well, they don't all give birth. That's not the important of the study of how many of them lost children. I think it was 2, could have been 3, from the anise study group. But when the babies were born, it was shown that the scent of anise was repugnant to babies that had been born to mothers that didn't rightfully eat anise. To the women that had depraved themselves and shamed themselves in front of their ancestors and their gods by consuming anise, those babies preferred it. They would turn their head to a scent of anise, a straight anise oil, not licorice, pungent anise. It was the child's smell preference from approximately a month. The numbers are a little bit vague because the study we only cared about the food culturing, passing of flavours. And I looked up the study, but then I promptly lost it because I have ADHD. You may not have noticed. I hide it really well. Anyway, so back to the anise study. The babies had a preference for it, and they sustained a preference for anise throughout their childhood. Alright, see what I'm getting here? TiiTii, in the modern method of cooking it, is blanched. It is boiled to soften the flavour, so that it tastes closer to duck. I'm opposed to this because that study shows to me that the food that we take into ourselves, the way that we eat, this is our culture. This is who we are. Your culture comes with breast milk and what you hear in your ear when you're a child. You may not be able to articulate it, but you took it in. in your first mouthfuls. You took it in before you were born. Your mother gave you the preferences that you ended up having. That to me is miraculous. That is beyond any possible belief in a real, honest to God, what you want to call Christian God. Because that's beyond miraculous. That the preferences you have, that you want to eat, my disdain of sugar, my dislike of everything, comes from the fact that my dad cooked for my mum all the time, including when she was pregnant. And through his cultural practices, I, with a Pakeha mother, inherited a Maori palate. That is why I think you need to have someone from the culture who is also a trained professional in an aspect of culture to help explain it. Because all these little things that aren't, all these disconnected, interesting little things, that's what I do. Like, I can turn around and grab, let's do it. Where is he? Heston Bloomfold is up here somewhere with the Fat Duck Cookbook. No, I'm going to grab down instead. Two completely different books. No, three completely different books. Okay. So, but I'm still going to talk about Heston Bloomfold because he's an idiot. But I will say this. One of his most famous desserts is a recreation of a Pink Panther bar. It is nostalgia. Some people consider him the height of chefing. That is the chef thing to be emulated. That you can take nostalgia. That you can take a memory and distill it down onto a plate and take people back to where they are. That to me is food culture. That is what we do. We are bards and troubadours that you can eat the song of. So, this guy, Southern States of America, constantly is considered one of the best chefs in America today. I will fight anyone. Thomas Keller is an ancient old hack who cooks French food. Not interested. And I will say specifically horrible things about other chefs as well if you want. But this guy cooks the food that he grew up with intensely, and he is brilliant at it because he keeps to his culture, he keeps to his roots. It is important to him. He explains Southern cuisine better than anyone else in the whole world, including all those French guys that rocked up in the 19th century. This book and my feelings on it don't require any explanation. I'd like to point out that, unlike Heston's book, I said that this would be maintained nearby, that I could grab it at all time. Heston's book is buried somewhere on that shelf. I don't actually know where. I know where my copy of Haikai is, and yes, that is the second copy of Haikai behind me. That's actually a gift for a friend that I ordered. I ordered him a signed copy. This is my review copy. So, yeah. Wonderful, fantastic book. And I hate it so much, and I hate the work that was poured into it, and the excellent mahi that's in it, that it, to me, is kept where I can reach it. In fact, I can't help but trip over it all the time. That's how important this book is. Because we have someone from the inside cooking. Now, my disagreement with Chef Fiso, I mean that with the most amount of respect, that to me there is no higher honour than to be a chef. Chef Fiso has the unenviable job of cooking our food for a Western palate. That is why she does what she does, and I salute her for doing that. I could not do that. I would never do that. I don't do that to TiiTii. I've cooked it for people that have turned around and told me it's disgusting. I look them dead in the eye and say, okay, it's not for you. It's not meant to be for you. It's for us. It's ours. Like a shibboleth. But I don't have a reputation to maintain as the best chef in New Zealand. I don't have to struggle as a woman in a sexist industry, and I don't have to struggle in a country that hates me because I am Indigenous. She has to juggle all those things. I only really have to struggle with two. One, I'm non-binary. Two, I'm Maori. And even then, the beard and the white skin kind of gives me a bit of a pass. So, I 100%, if you want to learn anything about Maori cooking in any way, shape or form, go buy this book. If you don't want to know anything about Maori cooking, you just want to look at pretty pictures, go buy her book. Her restaurant is expensive and hard to get to for the majority of people. I personally wish I had the money to buy 5 of these and give them to every single mare in Aotearoa. That's how important I think it is. I know that if this book was in the hands of any auntie on any mare, this would make her... No, I'm not going to say it would make her a better cook. It would give... There's a lot of pain that comes with cooking with a Maori, because you get told by Europeans all the time, all you can do is burn, boil or bury. That's it. Anyway, this book. Everyone, if you live in Aotearoa, consider this book your kohi to continue to live in Aotearoa. I don't get paid to say that. I don't get paid to do anything at the moment. Okay, and finally, this book. Marcus Samuelsson. A guy who reminds me of Marcus Samuelsson. He's a guy from Ethiopia that was adopted into a Scandinavian family. I believe he grew up in Sweden. I think it's Sweden, could be Norway, could be one of the Scandinavian places. Yeah, look, I probably should remember. He's currently based out of New York now. Red Rooster is the original Soul Kitchen. It is the home of chicken and waffles. I'm not going to go into the significance of this because that's probably something to say for another time. But this is food that he loves, that he cooks, and it is fantastic. That and his a Soul of a New Cuisine, which is his modern North African inspired cookbook, are fantastic to show you what cultural cooking is. I wanted to show those books because they all tell a story. They tell a story of a time and a place. And they're storybooks, basically. No one's going to buy these books and actually cook that stuff at home. Not every day. But it's a story. And that's what our culture is. That's what culture is when you boil it right down to the absolute essence. Culture is a group of people who have accepted a singular story as being their story. And that's powerful and famously pungent food, like, I would say kimchi, but everyone loves kimchi. Food like that. Oh no, we'll keep going with kimchi. Kimchi and the method of producing it are considered cultural treasures by the South Korean government, in that the makers of the pots are considered cultural treasures. Not just the people that make it, not just the people that breed the cabbages, not just the people that... Kimchi is such a powerful component of Korean culture. The entire process is sacred by law. And I think it is the same with things like TiiTii. It is a fundamental Maori dish because I guarantee you, unless you... I'm yet to meet the Pākehā that actually enjoys eating TiiTii. That is my shibboleth. When people sit there and you hear that, oh, I'm practically Maori, I grew up on a Maori, my best mate's a Maori, I married a Maori, man. Yeah, but how do you feel about mutton bird? Ooh, it was a bit fishy. You're just off the boat from England. Sorry, dude. And that to me is what something like TiiTii represents. It is something I worry that we are losing because of high-end chefs like Chef Fiso saying it's okay to blanch it to soften the taste, as opposed to saying this is the taste. This is what it tastes like. You don't have to like it. Hell, I'm not even going to sit there and say I'm going to take your Maori card off you if you don't like it. But what else in the world is more Maori than spreading some mutton bird from the back of the fridge. You know the one, that takeaway container that's got the absolute last little bit, and you smear the jelly on your toast, maybe a little bit of fat if Dad isn't looking, and you smear that on there even with the bones, because the bones have been boiled till they're soft as well, and you know, and you have that sandwich and you bite into it, and there's that rich, salty, fishy, ducky, that taste that you feel in your belly weight, that feels older than anything possibly could be. And I think, to me, that is far more important and needs to be far more protected than, say, lemon and pesto, or pavlova, or lamingtons, or custard slice, or anything else. I think it needs to be treasured and loved because it is so hard for most people to truly love TiiTii. It's a bit like us. It's not for everybody. But I tell you what, I'm willing to do an awful lot to make sure I can always get mine.